My name is Kirstie Whitaker. I am the Executive Director for the Berkeley Institute for Data Science. I work very closely with Jarrod, who's on the panel, who's our Executive Director for the UC Berkeley OSPO. So our successes are entwined around our vision for open source data science and open source being used across campus. And our vision for today is that you will also be able to speak an awful lot more. So today we have this panel to get us started, and then we have some multiple parallel sessions that you can join and have a bit more of a sort of smaller group discussion. And we have a closing session at the end of the day, which is asking how can we help? How can the UC OSPOs across the network make a great impact and support all of the people across all of the different groupings and flavors of staff, faculty, students on each of our campuses. So to get us started, I wanted to dig in to what the meaning of open, because one of the things that I've sort of witnessed over the last kind of 10, 15 years of my career is that everyone has an intuition about what open source or open science or open scholarship or open access or open hardware or inclusion might mean. And it turns out that they're not always the same. So I wanted to kind of give us a bit of time this morning to dig into that. And may I please, in the spirit of having this be a day where everyone talks quite a lot, could I ask you to turn to your neighbour? If there's not one neighbour, you can make a little small group of three. There's no sort of strong rules of this. And could you tell your neighbour what you think open source means? Thank you. If they are experts, they are going to tell you a little bit, and they're going to introduce themselves and tell us how they sort of came to be working in openness, broadly defined. The goal is not for these to be the definitive answers. This is not a test. The purpose is to see the diversity of definitions. So Todd, would you mind going first? All right, quick, I've got that.
Okay. Good morning. My name is Todd Grappone. I am at UCLA. We run part of the OSPO, so I work in the library. I've been working on projects that have the word open in them for 20 years. Open access publishing, open science, open data. And to me, I was just telling Kristen before, just now, there's the language of scholarship these days is open. It's open science, it's open access, and open source fits right into that, sort of a nice way to work so that our scholarship, our science is visible and broadly used.
Hi, I'm Kristen Ratan, and I run a consultancy called Strategies for Open Science, or Stratos for short. But I came at this through open access originally back in 1999, so I think I actually, beat you there, Todd. I heard a talk from Pat Brown, who's one of the co-founders of PLOS, and he talked about the freedom of information, and it's just like a light bulb went off for me, and I thought, of course, all this information should be freely available. How could it not be? But I was, young and impressionable and then locked into the paradigms that we all grow up with. So I ended up becoming the publisher of PLOS years later, and now have this open consultancy. And I really believe that open science, which I think is the big goal, like making the world's knowledge available to everybody, depends on open source and depends on open data and all of the other open. So it's a network, it's an ecosystem that has to be in place.
Hi, I'm Jarrod. So I got to open, starting with, I think, the free software movement. Sometime around 1994, I started using the Linux operating system and was very inspired by that. Then around 1998, I started getting interested in wavelets or computational harmonic analysis. And there's a faculty from Stanford, David Donahoe, who had written this Wavelab book, and all the code in that book, every figure you could generate yourself with code, you put it online. And he had this paper called Reproducible Research, and argued that scientists needed to share their work. And so these were the two axes that I came on, and then when Open came in sometime around 99, 2000, I think it really sort of merged those ideas. It went away from these rights you had to have access to the software you use to much more of a sharing open culture that sort of now captures all these open ideas.
Hi, my name is Amber Budden. I'm the Associate University Librarian for Digital Strategies at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I am not a librarian by training. I'm a librarian by title. My background is actually as an ecologist. And so my journey into the space of open, I was an ecological researcher in the UK doing my PhD, and it was a very kind of isolating experience in that my field at that time, and perhaps it was a UK bias, was not very collaborative. And so I started to postdoc in the US, and I had the opportunity to collaborate with individuals that were working on publication practices because there was a change in publishing that was happening in my field in behavioral ecology. And so that led me to work in the space of kind of looking at the way in which some people are able to publish, biases that exist, the access around literature, how we quantify our impact and our contribution. And so, working in that space of thinking about bibliometrics and open access, I then moved into working with open data and reproducibility of research, so open science, and now I'm working in collaboration as part of this open source. But for me, the emphasis has really been about collaboration and the opportunity to extend what we do, whether it's with data, whether it's with publications, whether it's with code, to be able to extend that, build upon that, and apply that to other endeavors, and to make sure that is equitably accessible across all different groups of peoples, and not just kind of held within ivory towers, as it were. And so I think I had a very kind of personal transition from this kind of isolated to much more collaborative environment, and that's what drives open for me.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So our next question is, would you on the panel give an example of an open project that you've been part of that has changed or is changing? You've all been doing this for a long time. I feel like you all aged just you all just gave that away in all of your introductions. So there probably is an example that you have that's really already made a difference, but is there anything that you want to share that sort of you think has changed the way the university functions in some broadly defined way?
So at UCLA, at the library, we do a lot of open source software. We write a lot of code, we maintain a lot of code. And the library as an industry does also maintain certain open standards, one of which is called IIIF, which is a way for us to share images from the library online. It's an open standard. It's something that we have been promoting as a way for a community on campus to use the product of the library in an open fashion. And it's just really a fancy way of pulling images out of the library and into your publication. And we, as a library, promote this standard in almost everywhere we can. And it's been, I think it's kind of a game changer for us because we spend a lot of time and a lot of money building these collections. We want people to use them. And up until a few years ago, it was pretty hard to do. Now it's open and it's quite straightforward.
And Todd, is that standard adopted off of UCLA's campus as well?
It's across the world. It's a worldwide standard, yes. And so yeah, it's something that I would say almost anyone who's at a university with a library, with a digital library, has the ability to use that standard. Yeah.
Thank you.
So one of the first projects I worked on when I launched Stratos back in 2019 was with a very new funding initiative called Aligning Science Across Parkinson's, or ASAP. And this is a funded initiative that was launched with principles of collaboration and open science. And so the good thinking there was open science is great, but it's in order to do something else. So open in order to increase collaboration across this funded group of researchers. And so I helped to set up this network of researchers and determine sort of how decisions would get made about their funding, and then onboarding them. I wrote the policies, and the policies for ASAP are everything has to be open, code, data, any sort of hardware that's used, any kinds of tangible objects like cell lines or antibodies, everything has to be made open in a repository with a persistent identifier at the time of a mandatory preprint. And the preprint, then, it has to be done before the article. So that was the sequencing, and the researchers were pretty shocked, because these are all top neuroscience researchers doing Parkinson's, and they were like, well, we don't ever have to adhere to any of these rules anywhere else we live. And the funder was pretty strong about this. They said, well, you do now, and they were giving away a lot of money. And so now there's this collaborative research network of Parkinson's researchers who are all sharing information, and most of them now share before they have to make it public within the network. So they have created that concentric circle of trust within that network that even precedes the mandated public sharing. So we'll be studying that now as a meta-science. I'm working with UVA's data science school to study this and see, where the collaboration increases have been. But there have been so many breakthroughs in Parkinson's research in the last few years, and some of it I think is due to this. So, and it has become a model for other funders who are interested in open science. And so now I've worked with other funders who have said, hey, we want to use that as a model system. So I think it's an influencing across philanthropic funders mostly, who want to have that kind of impact.
Oh, okay. Mine is a smaller scale example. So within my domain of ecology, I was working on an open source project called Data One, which is a network of data repositories. And the underlying code for that is a repository platform, Medicat, which is being used by a lot of organizations internationally to stand up data repositories. And the functionality that has been introduced, and this project's kind of decades old at this point, there's been increases in functionality continuously, and much of that is to support the repository functioning itself. But I think that what I'm interested in is leveraging that for information literacy, using tooling for education, and for exposing contributions, research contributions other than published articles. So for example, one of the components is a metadata quality check. So this enables curators to assess the quality of the metadata, but it also means that individuals, when you submit your data to the repository, you get feedback on the quality of your metadata in real time, and you can enhance the metadata. And we have data showing that repeat submissions from the same individuals, the quality of the metadata is increasing. And so being able to use this tooling for education, I think, is fantastic. Another feature is metrics. Again, repositories are interested in the metrics associated with the data, but as an individual, because of the network component of Data One, you can have a platform or profile page that has metrics associated with all of your data deposits across the network. And I think that this, I think there was some conversation about incentivizing or valuing contributions outside of published articles, being able to have profile pages like this where people can point to their contributions and have that assessed in an easy, documented way, helps to increase awareness and visibility around these contributions. And so I think, for me as a non-engineer, that community aspect, the education aspect of that work is really exciting. So I wouldn't say that it has changed the organization, but it's changing the community a little bit, and I'm grateful for kind of pushing that needle.
Yeah, so in 2000, I came to UC Berkeley and was hired to sort of run the data analysis pipeline for the Brain Imaging Center there. And we were running on top of a Linux system, and we were, all the software we had written was open source. But in between, there was this either MATLAB or IDL, and that was kind of the situation at that point, right? Most scientists were using something like Mathematica or IDL or MATLAB, which were these commercial packages. And it didn't really fit in with the community. And so a small group of us around 2004, some people argue before, that's when I guess I joined around 2004, thought that really this new language not just new language, but this language Python would be a really nice language to work in a scientific environment. And all we needed to do was build that missing piece of the scientific computing stack and join that community. Now it's used everywhere, and it's hugely popular on campus. I think 2004, maybe 5, I invited John Hunter and Fernando Perez to come to Berkeley. So John Hunter was Matplotlib, and Fernando was an IPython developer at that time, or the IPython developer. And we had the very first sort of scientific Python boot camp tutorial, workshop, and campus, and I had trouble getting campus to find space for it. They thought, I'd heard from many people that this was not going to be something scientists wanted to use, this was niche, and at this point, we had this data science course on campus that over half the students take, built on the scientific Python ecosystem, and Jupyter, which IPython was the predecessor of. So I think these have been projects that I've been really lucky to be part of.
Just a quick note, Amber and I actually started working together on an open source project, the DMP tool, years ago. And we still maintain it at CDL. And it's a very useful little tool, let's just put it that way. It helps scientists and others write data management plans for funding activity. So it's been ongoing, I would say, for
2010 we started that.
For quite a while. So, yeah, I just thought I'd mention that.
And actually the current product owner for that from CDL is here somewhere. Oh, there we go. Hi. So if you have any questions about DMP tool?
So we have a couple more questions, but I wanted to take a moment because those are amazing impacts in the world. Like all of them, and the diversity of them are really wonderful. And one of the things that I've observed is that people who work in open source, work in open science, there is a real kind of, you do it because it is the right thing to do, a sort of, a kind of moral goods. And actually one of the things that I think that leads to sometimes is people feeling a little bit underappreciated because it's hard to say I did because the whole point is we did for multiple other people. And because it's coming from a kind of it's the right thing to do in the world sort of motivator, it's even more uncomfortable to put your hand up and say, I did. So I just want to ask everyone here to give our panel members a big round of applause. And just before you do, we are applauding them as individuals, and we are applauding the communities of all of the people that they worked with and empowered in the way that science and research broadly has improved as a result. So join me. I enjoy panels where the panel members feel extremely uncomfortable. So the reason I wanted to have that now is our next question is, in which ways do you think open source, open science, open scholarship can be misunderstood? Would anyone like to jump in with that? Todd, thank you.
Yeah, I've got the mic, I'll just jump in there. I'm having trouble with this sort of sentiment because, the world runs on open source software. If you've got an Apple laptop, you're running on open source software. I think it's just, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry. So I just wanted to say that. I think it's clearly part of everything we do every day. I think one way I would answer this question a little bit is about, I think as we've moved to global open science, that concept I think is a little misunderstood. People have just started talking about what that means, how that is going to have an impact on scientific research, and whether or not, all nations on Earth will participate, or if it's going to be something a little seen as national intellectual property. I don't know, but I think there's a lot to be worked out, and hopefully it'll be fun.
I think that I agree with everything that you just said, but unfortunately, so many people still have a lot of misconceptions. And just a couple weeks ago, I was working with another funding initiative, similarly to the Parkinson's one. They also want to create a very open and collaborative network, and they want to share things. And I heard so many people say wrong things about open source. They're like, yes, open data, great. Open source, I don't know. So, I would challenge that. And so one person who builds tools was saying, well, it's less secure. Because it's open, anyone can figure out how to hack it. I'm like, no, because it's open, everyone can figure out how not to let it be hacked. And he thought, well, I've never heard of that. So I feel like open source needs a campaign, like a huge public relations campaign, like Got Milk or Don't Litter or one of these other ones. We've got to get one for open source. But another person who's building AI, and they were building AI tools that were open source, she said, yeah, I do this because I work for a university, but I wouldn't if I didn't because it can't be monetized. Open source can't be monetized. So those are just horrifying misconceptions that I thought I'd share with everybody.
Did you want to comment?
Oh wait, you need the microphone.
Oh, okay.
Because the space online.
Yeah. So, hey. That would help.
Hey guys, I'm a friend of Todd's, Paul Lancaster. I'm with Red Hat. Some of the statements that are being made on the panel, we've been hearing that for years, right? You can't monetize open source. Well, IBM just came in with their earnings yesterday. Red Hat's up 13% year over year. We're a $6 billion plus business. All we do is commit to open source. That's all we do. The VLLM presentation today, we bought that company. The Neural Magic were the leaders and of course it came out of UC Berkeley. A lot of these messages we've been trying to defeat for a long time. So I'm just saying, as far as the panel is concerned, we've heard this stuff for a long time, and we're happy to help where we can and drive that message home. I just wanted to add to that.
Yeah, and I think the one of the things that we're trying to do is recognize, even though the messaging has been sent for many, many years, there are still, this is what you were saying,
outrageous misconceptions among people who are actually building open source. That's how bizarre that was. Oh, you're building open source and you don't understand it, So that's just a strange disconnect.
I'm going to jump in because my thought is actually a follow-up from that. It's almost the flip side. So recently we were going through a process of identifying open source programs and services that we offer within the library, and there was this question about if we were to kind of build this directory of information, what kinds of things do we need to include, and someone included, license fees or subscription or cost, and then there was a comment, well, if it's open, it should be free. So the alternative, you can't monetize it. That's because the user, it's free, it's open, and I think that is a misconception, and I think that we're going to have a sustainability panel later, but this idea that you can't charge for something on top of open, and the expectation in the community is we shouldn't have to pay. Well, if you don't have to pay, that somewhere, someone is maintaining this. There are developers that are being paid, there are others that are giving their time as part of a community activity, but ultimately it costs to maintain this. The money has to come from somewhere. And so I think that there is this lack of understanding of the economics behind it, and also an expectation that the user shouldn't have to pay. And so I think that is part of your campaign as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so maybe take this in a slightly different direction. I will talk a little bit about some of the understanding I now have that I would have been surprised, I think, and surprising as I was part of this community. And that's largely, there's a lot of other opennesses that we haven't talked about. So open community, open governance, open-mindedness, open heart. I've had some of my closest friendships and some of my best learning, my best mentorship experiences in the open source community. We've also, I think, grown as a community, a lot of projects I'm involved in, where we had a very top-down, sort of dictator-for-life model of governance. And I think as we've matured, we found that really sharing that governance structure and making everything transparent has brought in sort of vitality and spirit to the projects that I'm involved in that I think was essential for the success. And this sort of open heart generosity thing, there's a lot of people in the community that are willing to spend huge amounts of time, and not always, but that's one of the things I've really enjoyed about this community, and I think it's something I wasn't expecting, and I don't think everyone always sees it.
You just have the mic to you real quick.
Thanks. I wanted to add one other thought, which is that there are people who are intentionally making using the term open source incorrectly because they want to be included in, when in fact what they have is proprietary. And we're seeing that currently in the debate over the open source AI definition, but it goes back, what's open source? Well, Roy and I talked for a second and said, well, it's something that abides by the open source definition, which is, a set of definitions that says it is or it isn't. So I think that there's something to watch out for, that people get these misconceptions because they're fed incorrect information from people who have an interest otherwise.
Thank you. I've got one more question for the panel, and we'll probably keep this sort of reasonably short because I want to make sure that there's some time for all of you to make your comments, your questions to the panel. So just very quickly, can you share a persona, a type of person, a role that people have that you think doesn't see themselves represented in your sort of definition of openness? And what would be, do you have any ideas about what would be needed to help them to see themselves as part of that broader community, that broader effort? Does anyone want to go for it? Jarrod? Yeah.
Yeah, so so I'm not, this doesn't speak for all open source, but I'm really involved very heavily in the open science aspect of open source, in the scientific Python and Jupyter domains. More in the scientific Python, but I have a lot of colleagues in Jupyter. And right now on campus, almost a huge amount of teaching is built on this. Tons of research is built on this. Many of the contributors have been students and faculty and researchers and postdocs at the university, but the leadership, I don't think has historically, I think it's starting to change, really recognize their benefit and their need to support and embrace this technology. In particular, I think, we talked yesterday, or some discussion yesterday that Fernando had about faculty promotions and academic recognition, but there's also, I believe, a need for the campus to start putting resources in to maintaining and funding some of the maintainers that are in their communities to make sure that this software is able to sustain itself and to be dependent upon.
In terms of a persona, maybe me 20 years ago. I'm not an engineer, I don't code. I do data analysis, and I do that by script, or I did many years ago. But in terms of open source, as a non-developer, I considered myself only to be a user, and I didn't think that a user was a contributor. I have since had roles in community engagement around open source, and so I know that's very much not the case, but understanding that the users of open source, the ability to request features, to contribute to issues and to tickets is a really valuable contribution. And so I think that being inclusive in that way, all ways in which people can contribute to open source are valued. We're going through this process right now. You've heard about the survey that is being developed by the UC OSPO network in terms of that defining what it means to be a contributor. We went with a very extensive list because we wanted to make sure to be inclusive of everyone that uses and has a role in contributing, whether that's a technical or a non-technical role. So I think hopefully we're changing that. 20 years ago isn't now, but I think there's still more work to be done.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll relate just a quick story. I worked with a faculty member at UCLA for about 10 years. He'd written a lot of code to basically record TV news. And he collected this, he wrote this software, but he never was able to get that to get that aspect of his work as part of his tenure and promotion package. And a couple of weeks ago, he just abandoned the project, which I was very surprised by. But there, I think, is a fundamental problem in our industry where someone can have such an impact on scholarship and not get any credit for it. And I just don't see us, I don't know that we're going to change that anytime soon, but I certainly hope so. There's a lot of discussion about it. And for me, there's a lot of value in doing that kind of work.
So true. I facilitate the National Academy's Roundtable on Aligning Incentives for Open Science. And that's a collection of university presidents, provosts, but also funding organizations. U.S. agencies historically have attended, but less so recently. And one of the things that they've asked is, if we're not just incentivizing high-impact journal publishing on tenure and promotion and grants and everything else, what do we incentivize instead? And so the open science people like me were like, well, all the things, open data, open code, all the other things. And they're just confused. They don't really know how to do that. They don't know how to make that part of the reward structure. Funders, I work more with funders than I do with the university leadership. But with the funders, they feel like maybe it's not their business. Like, I don't want to interfere in the work that I'm funding. These researchers know their job, and it's our job to give them money to do it. But they then say, well, but we do want open data, they'll say. But they don't mandate anything else that goes along with it. So the data without any sort of code that was used to analyze it is of limited value, or without open standards to be able to merge that data set with other data sets and create data lakes. So they just don't see that bigger picture. And I don't think they feel like it's their job to get into the business of the software and the technology being used.
Thank you so much. Todd, do you want to just add something? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. It's we're from the University of California, and I think, one thing to note is just the amount of research that comes out of the UC system is tremendous. You mentioned these high-impact journals. I think we produce like 20% of those articles at the University of California. Everyone, I think if you talk to the best and the brightest minds doing research today, they all say that open science is really important to them. And that's, those are the best and the brightest at the University of California. We should really be supporting them in any way we can, because they're going to solve how to treat Parkinson's. These are really important things.
Thank you so much. So we have about 10 minutes for questions. I just wanted to do one more. I'm going to do 2 minutes of having you turn to your neighbor again and just share any reflections. If you feel a little bit nervous, you could workshop and say, does this seem like an interesting question? But just talk to your neighbor for 2 minutes, and then we'll come back and folks can grab the microphone and ask any questions of the panel. So just 2 minutes. Have a little reflection.
Next time, we need to have more structured small group breakouts.
I know the pros and cons.
It has been, that's really generous people. One thing I've noticed is, so I'm working on, my grad business one project I have, and we use something called Squig, which is a way to wrap C code, or C++, whatever language. And the maintainer of that, one time just gave us a PR because he had updated his software. And I've never met him. I knew his name because I knew the software. And he fixed our package to work with it and do something. And I had no idea. He already is doing his own work on his own project. And I see that kind of thing before where people just come and give stuff. At Network X, Dan Schultz is the leader of that. One of the kindest ever. It makes it, and I'm not always the best at it, but I know how important it is. It makes it fun. Can you nothing. Do more work.
to allow us to come back to the questions. So maybe to everyone start. I'm going to ask everyone to start looking at
It was quite an hour, so it's 9:30 to 10 minutes.
I'm going to get everyone to start looking for the discussion. Let's see one of my child's attempts to draw everyone's attention.
Yeah, it's like a cowbell or something.
If you can hear me, clap your hands once. If you can hear me, clap your hands 3 times. If you can hear me, your hands on your head. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that very much. We don't have very much time for questions, but we do have about 6 or 8 minutes. And Juanita has the microphone. And let's get it started.
Hi. So I have a question that relates to kind of 2 of your answers. So one of you was speaking about a colleague applying for tenure and feeling like this project wasn't valued. And then also you were speaking about how funders maybe don't feel like they can incentivize these things. So how do we incentivize this work and make it so it's valued in some of the more traditional kind of measures like tenure and things like that?
I have some strong thoughts. I think, first of all, we all argue amongst ourselves. We're driving everybody crazy in the outside of the open community. We're driving everybody crazy because everybody has to have their own definition of things, and everybody has to use their own version of it, and we can't agree.
Well, that's not true.
It's slightly different from what you just said. I think it's I'm going to split a hair here. And so without unity and convergence of ideas, we don't have a bunch of a voice. And this is what I learned in this round table is like we need to offer up a really simple, nice set of solutions wrapped in a bow that everybody agrees on. And we just don't seem to be able to do that, and that's why we can't have nice things.
Yeah, so first I want to say I have the perspective that it's an insurmountable problem, will never change. And I've had that before, and I think, in my experience, the good news, I think, is that, some of the projects I've been working on, when you want to change something, you work and work and work, and it doesn't seem like it's changing, it doesn't seem like it's changing. And then at some point, and years down the road, you look backwards, and you realize how much it has changed. It's just that change every day by day, doesn't seem much. But this is an example of the kind of change that we're going to need. We had panelists that are going for full lectureship, like Fernando. And I think that this change will happen, but it's going to just require keeping the faith and keep the work going.
No large-scale example at UCSB. I mean, it's just about kind of pushing the dial up a little bit at a time. So UCSB, and I think other campuses do this, you have something called a biobid, which is your academic record, and it's what's used for your review. You'll hear that at review every 3 years or so. And so the Office of Research reached out to us and said, hey, can you review this biobid form? And we're like, yes. You need to put other outputs, not just publications. And wouldn't it be great if people could put their ORCID in there? And so we have an easier way of assessing all of the contributions. And so that's small scale, but just those conversations and kind of moving things along is helpful.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions?
Workshopping my question, it sounds like a version came up yesterday, but I'll try to tweak it. In my role in the library at Berkeley, it's much easier for me to license things that are paid, to interact with paid vendors, even when I want to sort of support an open source version of something. An example might be like, we can lay out tens of thousands of dollars for something, a database, but then the equivalent open version, it's harder for us to both pay for something that's free, if that makes sense. We don't have the actual pathways, the grooves to make that happen, and then we don't necessarily have relationships that form with a vendor, a sales rep, or like a kind of a key person through the open source project to form those long-standing relationships with. How could we change that? How can open source projects make themselves like a little bit different so we can just like even input a code that allows us to kind of form those relationships and possibly pass payment if that's desired. But administratively and bureaucratically, it would just be so nice to tilt it the other way when it's just so much easier to fall into those old grooves.
Is Is everyone on the panel like? Yes, we would love that. Like, does they, Todd, I'm going to, yeah.
I feel your pain. I spent probably 6 months a few years ago trying to contribute to an open source project from the Wellcome Trust in the UK. I just wanted to give them a few $1,000s. And it was almost impossible. At the same time, we have no problem paying Red Hat for support for their open source product. And I don't know, I just make it make sense. I don't understand why we can't make these contributions as the University of California, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. At the same time, we work for the state. It's very bureaucratic.
I do think, when I was sort of saying we need convergence, we need unity, I'm thinking a lot about standards and adherence to that, even common nomenclatures. But I think there could be standards for sustainability models too, just like roll something out there that's like allowing for payments, money to move coherently around the ecosystem in a better way. I think it's really about standardization in my mind.
And I should add, from direct experience working with an open source project where we had a service layered on top that had a fee base associated with it. You're saying that you're challenged with how to pay. They're challenged with how to receive. The bureaucracy associated with being able to receive funds and then how to budget those funds are almost not worth it. And so, that needs to change as well, because the benefit for the open source project isn't that. Unless it's, gobs of money, then bring it up. But, for kind of small scale service fees, the administration cost is too high.
Can I, sorry, I was just going to two-finger in on this, because one issue is, I agree, looking at companies like Red Hat, which is an open source, a company that's based on open source, and not just because they're our platinum sponsor, and I want to give a hat tip to them, but they're one of a number of companies that are like that. But also, I think a lot of UC campuses don't realize that they are in some way connected to the Linux Foundation. A lot of us are members through one form or another, and that may also be one way of connecting. So I think just keep that in mind as well.
So we are at time. I just want to ask the panel if there's anything that you want to finish on. Is there a request? Is there a suggestion? Is there a message that you want to share? Yeah, thanks, Todd. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I do think the impact of the OSPO that's going to have on the University of California is really, I'm very hopeful that it's going to have a tremendous impact. When we first started this project, I called my friend Paul, and he said, OSPOs are cool as shit. And I was like, oh yeah, this sounds great. And in fact, in the last year, I connected with so many people across the globe who are doing open source because they're so interested in the OSPO and the concept. And I do think I'm super hopeful that we're going to have it. The response on campus has been great.
I think that's so great because it gets, convergence has to come through vehicles, right? And so OSPO is a uniting and unifying and maybe activating place.
I guess one thing I'm hopeful is that everyone here will go back to their communities and tell them about what we're doing, and hopefully next year we'll have a much larger and more vibrant community, and hopefully have more discussions going on.
That's a great input.
And I'm going to plus this one. All of those. Wonderful. Okay. Just a very quick, please, round of applause for the panel. Thank you so much, everyone.